Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We will be starting the webinar in just a few minutes, but I'm going to go over some housekeeping quickly. So you'll be aware that you are not currently able to speak or have your cameras on, so you're just listening to us today, but you can submit questions for our guests. If you click on the questions drop down in your GoToWebinar menu, you'll be able to type in your question. Do make sure that you hit enter or press send, because otherwise it might just sit there and then we won't be able to see your questions, and they'll be passed on to our presenters when we get to the questions portion of the day. So the webinar is being recorded and will be available online in a couple of days. If not this afternoon, we'll just see how we go with that. But now I would like to welcome Diana Harris, who is ARACY's lead for knowledge translation. Thank you, Diana.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. We're here today because Friday is International FASD Awareness Day. Sorry, we're just sorting out the sound. Better? Yes, that's much better. Right, we'll start again. We're here today because this Friday, September 9th, is International FASD Awareness Day. FASD, of course, being Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. We're joined today by Sophie Harrington, the Chief Operating Officer of NOFASD, the National Organisation for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, and by FASD advocate Jessica Birch. They're going to talk to us about FASD, about the hidden disability that FASD is and the way that it can affect all aspects of a child or a young person's life into adulthood if it's not diagnosed and treated correctly. Sophie has held positions in frontline services and senior management across a range of sectors, including alcohol and other drugs, out-of-home care and justice. She's provided services to multiple young people and families impacted by FASD. Sophie joined NOFASD in Australia in 2017 and for the first time learned how even very low levels of prenatal alcohol exposure can result in a FASD outcome. These days, Sophie is a FASD educator, coordinator of NOFASD's lived experience expert advisory groups. She's a member of the steering committee for the National FASD Awareness Campaign and the FASD Diagnostic Guidelines Review, and as well as numerous additional FASD specialist support groups. Jessica is a writer, speaker and advocate living with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Jessica shares her lived experience of FASD to arm individuals, families, carers and professionals with the information they need to create successful supports and interventions for folk living with FASD. Jessica believes that awareness and action are critical, not only to slow the rate of children who are born affected by FASD, but to accurately diagnose and assess individuals, giving them the best chance for a successful and happy life. So I'd like to hand over to Sophie and Jessica now to teach us more about this spectrum.
Thank you very much, Diana. Thank you, Sarah. I have, as you've just heard, with me today, Jessica. So we're both here and she is. And thank you to Jessica for joining me today.
All right, sorry, Sophie, we've got no sound there. So while Sophie sorts that out, I would belatedly, sorry, we're a bit discombobulated this morning. We've had some tech issues. So where I should have started was acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I am privileged to live, work and play on, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I'd like to extend my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to convey my respects to the traditional guardians and custodians of the lands on which you're joining us today from all over Australia. And I extend my welcome and my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who are joining us today. I think Sophie is now good to go.
Can you hear me now, Diana?
Nope, still no sound for Sophie.
Okay, it's very strange. Let me see if it's a... Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Hello? Now I can't hear Diana, but you can hear me. Okay. All right. Believe it or not, everybody, we did do a test run, and the test run was fabulous. But, you know, that's what happens. That's what technology is all about. Now, can you see my screen? Sharing my screen. Fabulous. Thank you, Jessica, for nodding at me. So Jessica is here too, and what we're actually going to do, whilst Jessica is an amazing presenter, she recently recorded a fantastic presentation at the Brain Injury Conference in Sydney back in June, I think it was. So we thought we'd actually share that with you today because it encapsulates the lived experience that I know Jessica would love you to hear. And then Jessica's going to join me at the end for questions as well. So I'm going to hide my screen, Jessica, so I won't see you anymore, but if you're very welcome to leave your camera on if you're comfortable to do so. I too would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians and elders of this nation, both past, present and future, and pay my respects to the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I would like to acknowledge anybody who's joining us today and also First Nations peoples of other nations too. I have the pleasure of talking to you today from the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. So I'm presenting from Whadjuk Noongar Butja today, and the place that I'm able to raise my family and live, which is a blessing. So NOFASD Australia, I will tell you very quickly about us. So as an organisation, for anyone who isn't aware of us, as a national organisation, we've been in existence for more than 20 years, receiving funding for the last 10 of those years from the Australian government. And as an organisation, we really see ourselves as that essential bridge between people with lived experience, and that's parents, caregivers and individuals impacted by FASD, but also then with service providers, clinicians, with researchers, and in the policy and advocacy space too. And part of what we do is to provide training for a range of different organisations across a range of sectors. On the screen now you can see our phone number, which is a 1800 free phone number, and that's for our helpline, which operates 7 days a week. And you also should be able to see our website address as well. What I would like to say before you start is you are going to hear lived experience stories today about prenatal alcohol exposure. Wherever there is alcohol, there is a risk of FASD. All communities, all cultures and all socioeconomic groups. So please keep an eye on that helpline number and know that it's there 7 days a week for anybody and all of us, because wherever there is alcohol, there is a risk of FASD. So what is FASD? We're using this acronym. Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder is the diagnostic term that's used to describe the physical and or neurodevelopmental disorder that can result from prenatal alcohol exposure. And FASD, alcohol, is a neurotoxin, so it's a poison or a teratogen, an agent that's known to cause birth defects and permanent brain injury in the fetus. And alcohol is a substance that can cause harm to the developing baby at any time during the pregnancy. And that's probably the really key fact, that if you took nothing else away from today, really important to note that fact, that at any time during the pregnancy, and would you believe the most sensitive period of time is actually those first early weeks. So those first sort of 12 weeks are incredibly sensitive, but there is no safe time to drink alcohol during pregnancy. So what do we know? We know that the National Health and Medical Research Council updated their guidelines in 2020, which now state that people who are pregnant or planning a pregnancy or breastfeeding should not drink any alcohol. And yet 1 in 4 people who were surveyed by the Foundation for Alcohol Research and Education this year weren't aware that alcohol should be avoided altogether during pregnancy. 50% of Australian women experience an unplanned pregnancy, and therefore this obviously leads to the fact that there is a great risk. There's a time when people do not know they're pregnant and they could consume alcohol. So it's really that planning phase. As soon as you start trying is the time to stop drinking, and we'll talk about that a bit more as we go through. And sadly, it's estimated that around 1 in 13 alcohol-exposed pregnancies will result in a FASD outcome. So who's impacted? How many people are impacted? What we do know is that there's a figure somewhere between 1 and 5% of the general population in Australia. The reason why I say somewhere between is because currently there has been no national prevalence study conducted in Australia. It's certainly a recommendation from the Senate inquiry that was conducted back in 2019 with results released in 2020. I think I've just said the year wrong, apology, 2021. And based on figures internationally from the States, the United States and Canada, they're looking at prevalence rates of 4 or 5%. So the reason we gauge between 1 to 5%, there's multiple reasons for that. But the fact that when the research was done in the United States and also in Canada, that the rates of alcohol consumption in Australia were higher, is not a wildly expected figure that we could be somewhere near to the 5% in Australia. There have to date been 2 specialist prevalence studies in Australia, both actually in Western Australia. The first being the specialist population study in the Fitzroy Valley region, which had an outcome of around about 12% of the population who were studied. The other study took place at Banksia Hill Juvenile Detention Centre in Perth, with a staggering rate of 36% of young people diagnosed with FASD. That's higher than any other international study to date. I think it's really important we keep this in mind. And FASD is often misdiagnosed or co-diagnosed due to a lack of understanding or awareness from community as a whole, but also from health professionals too, because there is so much stigma around asking the question around, did you consume alcohol? And we have a range of resources on the NOFASD Australia website that can also assist with thinking about that more, because they're tough questions to ask and it really needs to be done well. I'd really like to share this video with you. It's a 2-minute video, but it really, for me, encapsulates how alcohol impacts the brain in a way that's really transferable and understandable. And I think you agree it's really good to understand. This is produced by the Department of Education in Western Australia. I'm not sure if you can all hear me, but you're not able to hear my sound, I believe. So I'm just going to see if I can change that. Oh, sorry, clicked through. I might be able to tell that I'm not a great presenter on here when it comes to sharing the sound. So apologies. Sarah, if you can give me any recommendations around being able to share the sound, that would be fabulous.
Hi, Sophie. You may need to unplug your headphones and maybe just check what your sound output setting is, because if it's the computer, you'll probably just need to unplug the headphones.
Okay. All right, let's try that. I'm just going to try and press play once more and see if it starts. If not, can you hear that? Could you hear the sound then?
No, sorry.
No, okay. Apologies everybody. Again, as I say, we've done the sound check. We did work on this before to make sure it all ran nice and smoothly. I'll try once more.
There is a little speaker icon on your play bar when it starts. Do you want to just check that that's all the way up? So at the bottom of that.
Sorry, I missed what you said then.
Oh, when it was playing, if you see there's a little speaker icon on the right-hand side of that bar across the screen.
Yeah. It must be sharing because I can hear it really loud at my end. So it must be part of the share function, unfortunately.
Are we able to share, Sophie?
I'm sorry, Diana?
Can we just skip the video?
We absolutely can. It's not a problem for this one because I am going to send the link through, but my concern is Jessica's video is crucial to share with you. Again, we can share afterwards, but of course it won't be quite the same. Just making sure there's nothing else here that I can do, which it doesn't look like I can. Apologies everybody, you have to love that these things happen. If we were in real life, I'd do a little dance for you now, but that's not an option. I did send the link to you, Sarah. I wonder if it's a possibility for you to try to share or not.
I can play the volume from my end if you want to play the video from your end. That way we won't be changing around the presenters too much.
Okay,
Let's
sure.
give that a go.
That sounds like a great option. Let's try again. Okay, can you all see my screen again at the moment?
The developing brain affects individuals differently. Based on the pattern of brain growth, we know that the greatest areas of difficulty will typically be in regions of the brain that are further from the brainstem. The impact on specific neurons depends on the timing of alcohol exposure. The brain grows from bottom to top. It begins as a tube, and it is from this tube that brain cells move upward and outward to gradually build the brain. First, glial cells, the support cells of the brain, begin to move upward and outward, branching off from the tube, forming scaffolding that supports the movement of the brain cells, called neurons. The neurons climb up the scaffolding, moving to a specified location, and in some cases, replicating to form more neurons. Some neurons have a short journey, others have a long journey. When alcohol is introduced to the process of brain growth, it may disrupt the cells in many ways, damaging the basic scaffolding, confusing the neurons so they are unsure of where they need to go, and or killing the neurons. Because of the upward and outward progression of the neurons and glial cells, the neurons that may be more vulnerable to the exposure of alcohol are those with further to travel, as there is a greater likelihood of misdirection. Alcohol exposure before birth can cause brain injury, which is permanent. The challenges faced by individuals with FASD are a result of these injuries to their brain. When we understand this, we can focus on supporting individuals to develop personal and social capability and the knowledge and skills required for learning and communication.
Thank you for that, Sarah. That was a big help. And hopefully sort of watching that really gives people an idea of, you can see how at different times how that pattern of alcohol exposure really can impact, and how it's so different for everyone. And that's why it's so important. There's a phrase that's often used by people in the FASD world, that if you know one person with FASD, then you know one person with FASD. And the reality is because the difference and the impact on the different areas of the brain can be so significant for everybody. We're now going to play a shortened version of Jessica's presentation at the Brain Injury Conference in June. Now we might have to do a countdown on this one, I think, so we do it at the same time, Sarah, as I hit play, so that you can also hit the volume, if that's okay. Are you ready, Sarah?
Yes, I am.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
My name is Jessica. I am 36 years old, and at 33 years of age, I was diagnosed with Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. My name is Jessica. I am 36 years old, and at 33 years of age, I was diagnosed with Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, or FASD, which is an umbrella term for a lifelong developmental brain injury impacting my entire body. You may be surprised to learn that FASD is the leading cause of non-genetic disability in Australia. FASD is 4 times more common than attention deficit disorder, autism spectrum disorder, and cerebral palsy combined. Yet despite this staggering statistic, FASD is so misunderstood and underdiagnosed that it remains largely hidden. Despite trying very hard to navigate life's challenges, such as my relationships, schoolwork, jobs, travel, my personal goals, and the rest, it became obvious from a very early age that many things were harder for me. As I grew, everyone just seemed increasingly and inexplicably better than me at everything. And I noticed that takes a toll, especially when you desire to do well and are consistently told that you are smart, capable, and should probably just try a little harder. The fact is, I couldn't try any harder. And despite all my efforts and the expectations that I could and should do well, my results often disappointed me and fell below the expectations of others. A person with FASD will have significant neurological impairments in at least 3 out of 10 identified brain domains, which results in an uneven neuropsychological profile. These differences cause functional difficulties across a variety of areas, and they manifest largely as behavioural symptoms. So, what that basically means is that when you live with FASD, it can be much harder, sometimes impossible, to do, retain, or even gain certain skills that are commonly taken for granted and integral to successfully understand and navigate the world. Things like remembering what you've learned, problem solving, decision making, multitasking, cause and effect reasoning, understanding and following instructions, prioritizing tasks, time and money management, understanding and responding to social cues, forming friendships. The list goes on and on. The skills that we need daily to participate in society can be incredibly difficult to master and use. And without a good grasp of these things, everyday life can and does become an endless maze of barriers, mistakes, and confusion. So I live in Melbourne. I'm a bona fide coffee snob right here, and I make my own coffee. I grind the beans, extract the coffee, steam the milk, you know how it goes. And I do those things perfectly well until my husband comes into the picture. Now, don't get me wrong, I am down for a yarn, but now I have to choose. I can either listen, process and respond to my housemate, or I can action the multiple steps to make the coffee. My brain cannot do both. If I attempt both, things become fraught. I'm instantly slow and flustered. Sometimes I just get straight up angry. I think I usually do perfectly well is now prone to error. I stop and start, I forget the order I'm working in, and I will forget what I just did and redo the step that I have done. My housemate becomes difficult to hear and understand. I can only respond in delayed, confused, and disjointed sentences. My brain is now working quite hard to do something that most would consider quite simple. And I invite you for a moment to consider what the impact would be if you extrapolate not being able to talk and do at the same time. I certainly didn't think that how I was engaging in and experiencing the world was a result of brain damage. I really thought that everyone was experiencing things the way that I did. They just did it better, understood it faster, or simply just had more talent. The effort involved in trying to keep up with my peers was immense, and I failed often. I became increasingly anxious. I believed that my perceived failures were totally and unequivocally in my control and ultimately my fault. I was 4 years old when I began internalizing these feelings as my own lack, and it wreaked havoc on my self-esteem and completely eroded my self-worth. By the time I entered my 20s, I lived in anxiety, depression, and despair. I hated myself, and I often wished for my death. Attempting to move into an adult world with adult responsibilities was the hardest decade of my life. The neurological differences of FASD express themselves in a myriad of combinations. It is a spectrum, meaning that people living with this brain injury have their own strengths that can hide and mask significant weaknesses. Throughout my life, my high expressive language continues to hide significant difficulties that I have with auditory and sensory processing, memory, attention, emotional regulation, and my executive and adaptive function. Not to mention the many symptoms that arise due to the damage to my nervous system. It was largely assumed that if I spoke well, I could do everything else well too. Don't be fooled. I needed a range of support and months of preparation to be here speaking with you today. And I regularly engage in therapy to support my functioning. And it is likely that I will need that support for the rest of my life.
I think you'll agree with me, Jessica has a real talent at presenting. And thank you for allowing us to share that today, Jessica. And I think you'll all probably join me in looking forward to asking a few questions as we progress towards the end of the webinar today. So the prevention message. This is something that we can all be involved in and all have a part to play in. Back in 2018, it feels hard to believe we're in 2022 now, the Australian Government Department of Health released their strategic action plan for FASD. This is not the first strategic action plan, but this one certainly had some funding attached, which really looks at 4 different key areas, which is around screening and diagnosis, support and management, priority groups, and also prevention. So really looking at all 4 of those areas to reduce the impact and to reduce the amount of prenatally exposed pregnancies to alcohol. And I will talk to you about one of those campaigns, which is Every Moment's Matter. Every Moment Matters, which is being supported and managed by Foundation for Alcohol Research and Education. This is another video, Sarah, so we're going to need to hit play on this one at the same time. It's just a 30-second video. I'll count down from 3, 2, 1.
Every moment matters in your pregnancy, especially this one. I'm a few days pregnant here. I hadn't even done the test yet, but I'd already stopped drinking alcohol. You see, everything you drink, your baby drinks at every stage of pregnancy. And any alcohol can damage their developing brain and organs. So make the moment you start trying the moment to stop drinking.
So as you can see, a really short, succinct video, which has been shown across the TV channels. Hopefully many people have seen it. It's across social media and the movie theatres and shopping centres. I'm really trying to target people who are considering planning a pregnancy or are pregnant. The reason why that's so important and incredibly important to me as a mother is because this young person you're seeing on the screen at the moment is my son. And I was a mum, I am a mum, and during those first 6 weeks of my pregnancy, we were very fortunate. We fell pregnant immediately, but I had no idea I was pregnant. And never having been pregnant, never having tried to become pregnant, thought it was something that would take several months to happen. This little boy you're seeing in front of me, and I do love these pictures, every time I see them they make me smile. He's now 16 and a half. He's got a long mullet, he looks very different to this, and he would kill me if I shared that photo, but I have permission to share the photos of him and these ones here. He's thriving in life to the best of his ability. Because he's had a supportive background, we've been able to do many things and put many things in place across the period of his life. The one thing that would have been wonderful was if we'd known from those early years when we started to see signs of the struggles with his learning, that he actually had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. If we'd known in those early stages, we could have done so much more to support and to help him. I was never ever asked if I drank alcohol during my pregnancy, and to be honest with you, I probably would have said no, I didn't, because I hadn't realised in that stage that the first 6 weeks of a pregnancy are so vulnerable to that developing fetus. To be clear, he was born as a 9-pound baby, he was full term, and he met all of his developmental milestones just slightly late. So really for him, the biggest challenges started to really be very obvious when he got to around about the age of 10 or 11, when the next level of executive functioning sort of kicked in, the load at school commenced, needing to be more autonomous, not being able to use his charismatic personality and great skills to adapt in with his friends, to be able to then actually start to have to rely on his own ability in the classroom. So academics for him are the struggle. And the reason I share my story and his story, our family story, is because there are so many young people out there who potentially are impacted, who, like Jessica, look just like a typical person, who speak really well. They don't look different, they don't present any different, but all individuals who may have their own needs and are being blamed for their behaviours or feeling like they lack something, as Jessica said in her presentation, because they have a brain-based disability that's unidentified. So something that's really important for us all to be aware of. So reducing the incidence of FASD is a community responsibility. We know that drinking patterns of fathers and communities impact on maternal alcohol use. We know that 38% of Australian women would be less likely to drink alcohol if their partner or spouse encouraged them to cut back or stop drinking during pregnancy, and 30% would cease drinking if their partner stopped drinking completely. I know when I think of my own pregnancy, we're very fortunate. My husband and I, neither of us have ever had concerns around alcohol dependency or misuse. However, it was always assumed that once I became pregnant, I would be skipper and he would, have a free taxi. And I think that's something that's ingrained in my culture as an English person, but it's also very common here in Australia as well. And we know that research points to a link between alcohol and poor sperm development too. So the onus is on the expectant fathers as well. And studies do show that alcohol consumption by biological fathers is significantly linked to other health issues in their children. So it is a community responsibility. There's two people that play as well. When we look at sort of the strengths, and I think this is what works, this is how we can support individuals who are impacted by FASD, it's really starting to look for somebody who is impacted at what works for them, what can help them to be successful, and really start to minimise the things that don't work. So I know with our son, when we've seen situations where we're just hitting up against a brick wall, we work around that and find other ways to make success out of situations. It's really important to remember that an individual with FASD has a complex neuro and/or physical disability. There are different impacts depending on the pattern of the impairment, as you saw in that video previously. That somebody will need to be supported at their developmental age, not their chronological age. And this is such a short session. I know my colleagues are here from NOFASD Australia as well today, and we deliver full day training, full 2 days training sometimes on this topic. But keeping in mind that somebody who has FASD at points and at time, particularly when they're under stress or pressure, may be acting like half of their chronological age developmentally. So it's really important to keep that factor in mind. Focusing on strengths, finding opportunities to praise, to encourage, to motivate, and remembering that we are the ones that need to adapt and change. So where to from here? So considering FASD and trauma. So there are some amazing practices out there and so much research around trauma-informed practice. And certainly having a trauma-informed approach is incredibly helpful when working and supporting an individual with FASD. But it's important to consider that FASD needs additional support and additional strategies too. So considering that FASD may be present where trauma is present is very important. Upskilling staff about FASD. Understanding and learning that FASD is across the lifespan. You will have heard Jessica mention during her presentation that she suspects that throughout her life she will need support at different points for different reasons and in different areas. Having a key worker or an agency or a case manager involved in young people, particularly in out-of-home care or in other areas, so that they can actually have that support and the one person that really knows them well. And connecting families, so providing them with support. You can contact the NOFASD helpline for more information or visit our website. There's also a range of Facebook support groups, international and national, and the FASD Hub have a service directory also. I keep keeping in mind that FASD crosses every system of care. Knowing that correctly recognising and addressing FASD can really assist with outcomes. And we know that early intervention and early diagnosis makes a major difference for the life outcomes and the potential adverse life outcomes that can impact people with and living with FASD. I'm going to quickly run through some resources on your screen. I'm very aware of the time and I certainly want you to have an opportunity to ask questions as we progress to the end. So just to say that the NOFASD Australia, as I've mentioned, have a website and there's a number of different sections on that website that you can go to find out more information. We'll talk through some of those. I took this screenshot yesterday and I was going to sneakily update it today, but I didn't get there. But we're now 2 days and 13 hours or so until International FASD Awareness Day that you will have heard Diana mention at the beginning. So that's this Friday, Friday the 9th. So it's the 9th minute of the 9th hour of the 9th day of the 9th month to represent 9 months of pregnancy, to really raise awareness for FASD. And you can find out more on our website. We've recently just released some resources as part of the Every Moment Matters campaign. So NOFASD Australia are supporting priority groups, and one of those targeted areas is women who are higher risk of an alcohol-exposed pregnancy. The resources are available on the NOFASD website under the service provider section, you'll find them there, and also under the parent section too. And these resources have been supported and compiled by people with lived experience, women who have had alcohol dependency and been pregnant and sadly had a FASD outcome for their child. But they talk bravely and courageously and honestly about what they needed during their pregnancy, and they've been a massive support to create this resource. Coming soon, as of the 22nd of this month, we're about to release a FASD and out-of-home care. You may have attended the session yesterday with the Centre for Excellence of Childhood Trauma, and this resource was mentioned in the launch there as well, talking about the importance of understanding FASD and the out-of-home care sector. And this Friday on International FASD Awareness Day, NOFASD Australia have been working with Early Childhood Australia to create resources for early childhood educators and also for parents. And I wish that something like this had been available when my son was 2 or 3 and we could see all those slight differences and quirks and amazing parts of his personality, which would really have raised our eyes to thinking, could this be something else? So these are some great resources coming soon and will also be released at the ECA conference they have in October. On the NOFASD website, there's a free course you can attend. It's modular, 7 modules and certificated at the end. This great resource that's very available, developed out of the Fitzroy Valley research and study and the amazing women that are resident and local to the area. FASD and complex trauma resource for educators, but I would say it's a resource for everyone. It really looks at the different areas of complexities and fabulous to utilise. Dr. Vanessa Spiller has created a range of resources to include an online course and her book as well, and some of these fact sheets can be available via her website, which you can see in the screenshot below, and also on the NOFASD website. There's also a range of resources to support adults. We've got advice cards, we've got a caregiver and parents toolkit, all absolutely ideal and essential for anybody who's recently had a FASD diagnosis and wants to support their children or adults living with them to find out more. A range of webinars, and you'll be able to read this in a slower version when you look through the recording after, if you choose to, or visit the NOFASD website. And contact NOFASD about PD if you'd like to know more and hear more about training. There's our helpline number again, and also our website. And you can engage with us, particularly for September awareness. Please do for this Friday. There's a range of webinars happening around the country and internationally. There's our social media handles, and you can contact us to find out more. Okay, back to you, Diana and Sarah.
Thank you so much, Sophie and Jessica. There's a lot to unpick there, and I'm going to start by encouraging everyone to send through their questions for Sophie and Jessica. I'm going to start because, well, first thing I want to say is those resources that Sophie has made you aware of there, I highly recommend those. They are accessible and well written and highly informative and definitely worth having a look at. I think one of the things I'd like to start with, and this is for both of you, is while we may not know the exact prevalence from everything that you told us and outlined there, we do know that it's really quite high, and yet people's knowledge is very, very limited, and there's a great deal of stigma attached, despite the statistics that you gave us about 50% of pregnancies being unplanned, and you can see how easily it would happen. So I think my first question is about International FASD Awareness Day, which, as well as being the 9th minute of the 9th day of the 9th month, I see that it started in 1999, and NOFASD was there on the ground floor. So you've got the Every Minute Matters campaign, we've got Friday and all the activity that's going to be happening there. What can people do, what can practitioners, the kind that are going to be listening to us today, do to keep FASD top of their mind when maybe they're working with a family or a child or even an adult and things aren't quite adding up?
Great question, Diana. Jessica, do you want me to start, or would you like to say something?
I definitely, you're welcome to start.
I think the awareness, Diana, is absolutely key, and the fact that I talk to, Jessica talks to, we all talk to at NOFASD, to so many parents who say, if only somebody had asked me in the earlier days. And I think there is such a stigma around asking about alcohol exposure. And until we can start to, and we being the royal we, but until that language is incorporated at the pre-pregnancy stage, when somebody actually is talking about birth control or ceasing birth control because of the fact that they are considering a pregnancy, you will hear questions like, oh, do you smoke? How much do you smoke? When you're pregnant, you must stop eating soft cheese and pate and wash your salads. You'll hear, if you're on pharmaceutical medications, that these must be ceased, or you must start to come off them or change them. But more and more, and sadly very frequently, we hear from people with lived experience that the question around, do you drink alcohol? You know, just in the same way that you'd ask, do you exercise? It needs to become part of that early phase, that early starting point. It needs to be there in education. When there are sessions that are being delivered around sexual health, or sessions that are being delivered around alcohol and alcohol and other drugs, talk about pregnancy and the risk of the next generation. I think that's where this needs to start. There's so much more I could say about that, but Jessica, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, just following on from what you said, I think it's really integral for health professionals to understand what FASD looks like and understand how it's hidden. I think understanding brain-based, I mean, for me, learning about this, just obviously with my diagnosis came a lot of learning and a lot of coming to terms and understanding with what the FASD looks like and how it presents in situ and in the everyday world. And it's easily hidden behind other things like trauma, like ADD and oppositional defiance disorder, and as Sophie said. So I think understanding, particularly for health professionals, and then of course parents, understanding what brain-based behaviours can look like, and having a look, or understanding that lens, the way that you would, you know, health professionals might understand the trauma lens, or understand the, you know, symptoms through the ADD lens and things like that. Understanding the FASD lens is important, and it's important when children and youth and adults like myself present to you with complex problems. Often I was coming, you know, into my doctor's office with a range of complex problems, and most of these were neurological issues. However, they weren't seen through the lens of having a neurological issue in my body. And so I think, yeah, having that well-rounded sort of approach is really important, considering the prevalency, or what we estimate the prevalency to be. It's often the last thing to be considered when it should be one of the first things to be considered. Yeah.
Let's come back to trauma in a moment. I want to unpick something you said about health professionals in particular. There's still a fair bit of, I don't want to say misinformation, but some of those early myths about FASD, about, you know, you don't have FASD unless you show the facial characteristics, those kind of things. Are they still out there?
Absolutely. Absolutely, they are. Yeah, they're so out there. Diagnosis took 4 years. It took 4 years for me going through the process of assessment and diagnosis. I visited geneticists and neurologists and lots of specialists, and there were certain professionals that told me that I couldn't possibly have FASD because I didn't present with epileptic seizures. I was also told that I couldn't possibly have FASD because I didn't have the sentinel facial features. However, I do have the sentinel facial features, and I was diagnosed with them. Not that it is the defining factor, but it is part of, it is a diagnostic tool that is used. However, if you don't know how to use those diagnostic tools properly, then it can be quite damaging for people who are looking for the answers and the interventions to the issues that they're having.
Absolutely. And as Jess says, only around about 17% of people will have the facial features. So 83% are likely not to have facial features, which is really quite the opposite to what most people believe. I know in training sessions we run, you'll often hear somebody say, oh yeah, I know quite a lot about FASD, I know there are facial features. So it's one of those areas, and as Jessica says, unless you are a trained developmental paediatrician or a FASD informed doctor, to actually be able to understand and measure those facial features, it's quite complex. For example, with our son, he actually has facial features, one of the facial features which are his eyes. Nobody would ever have picked that through his entire trajectory. It's only as he's grown and matured that his eyes didn't grow at the same rate, if that makes sense. And yeah, many of those misconceptions and concerns around stigma and stigmatizing the mother, stigmatizing the child. But the reality is what you will generally hear, and I don't think, Jessica, I've heard anyone say with lived experience the opposite to this, that having a diagnosis, it's not about having a label, it's about having understanding, because somebody actually is looking at you and supporting you with the lens that they need to be able to draw out what appears to be a hidden disability.
Yeah, I completely agree. You feel the diagnosis for me was a weight off my shoulders. It was had given myself and the public had, and you know, the people in my life had given me all these other labels, you know, and they were all the wrong labels, and they didn't help me. They didn't pull me forward, and it led to a lot of hardship and a lot of despair and you know, that, as I said in my presentation, a lot of internalization of these feelings of lack, and it was because I was given all the wrong labels. And once I got given the right label, I could really find meaning and understanding in my life. And then I was actually able to get access to the support that I needed. And without the diagnosis, you don't get that support. And we really relegate many people in our society, children and young adults and you know, and then people into their middle ages who have struggled their entire life and they've been labeled in other ways. And without that support, you know, you really fail to thrive. And I speak because I don't want to see that continue to happen.
Thank you, Jessica. Now I'm getting a couple of questions about people want to ask questions, and we've got some of them coming through that Sarah's just picking out for us now. But just as a reminder, if you pop your questions in the chat, don't forget to hit send or return, and then they'll come through and we'll be able to see them. While we wait for some of the audience questions, Jessica, I just wanted to touch on that question about trauma, because we've talked about the importance of a trauma-informed approach. And I just wanted to sort of be quite clear that I'm understanding you correctly. This length of time it takes to diagnose, the misdiagnoses that you may go through on the way, that in itself is a traumatic experience. These years and years of thinking that it's you, there's something wrong with you.
Absolutely. For me, for my experience personally, I really, for lack of a better term, I fell through the cracks, and I feel that had a lot to do with the fact that I have quite high expressive language. I can articulate myself quite well. I'm a person who always wanted to do well. I always wanted to excel sort of in academia and stuff. I didn't excel in academia, but I really wanted to. And I didn't, as a child, although there were some quirks there, and I was quite a moody child, I didn't express really extreme behaviors that you might see, or disruptive behaviors that you can see in some examples of FASD and some of those behavioral challenges. Not that they weren't there, but I didn't have those really sort of extreme aggressive behaviors. And so when we often I find that there's this really kind of limited view of the presentation of FASD, and often we are looking for extreme behavior. We're looking for unruly kids that for all intents and purposes just really stand out. And I didn't in that way. And so and because of my politeness and my sort of wanting to please, I just kind of learnt to mask, and I had many troubles, but yeah, they were just always sort of, sorry, I'm waffling now, but they will always labeled as something else. And but similarly, sorry, quickly, just on this point, Sophie made a comment about her own child and her own experiences, that when executive function, you know, as I got older and as demands increased, things became harder and harder. So by the time, for example, I was in year 8, 9, 10 in high school, problems really started to appear, and I really started to plummet. I was kind of fighting, I was maintaining, like just, and then I really started to fall down. Yeah.
We're getting a fair few questions about diagnosis. Who typically diagnoses FASD? How is it diagnosed? Sophie, you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation that there's sort of 10 cognitive domains and you need to be having issues in at least 3 of those. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And also, does a FASD diagnosis enable you to get support from the NDIS?
So the last question I'll answer first, and the answer to that now I'm pleased to say is yes, as long as when the application is made to the NDIS that it's very clear around the functional impairment for somebody on a daily basis. So sadly, because we love to work with strengths and to look at the positives, but in an NDIS application, it needs to be quite clear the worst day, how it would look like with no support. There is a page on the NOFASD website as well, which provides some language context and some information around NDIS applications and using terminology for FASD. Going back to your original question, and Diana, absolutely, there's 10 domains of the brain that may be impacted and that are assessed for a FASD diagnosis. I'm not a clinician, so I'm going to say this from a point of view of somebody with lived experience for NOFASD Australia. But those domains, there's around 6 of those domains, I think it is, that can be assessed by a psychologist. Ideally, somebody who's FASD informed is really quite important, but also a paediatrician for somebody under 18 gives the official diagnosis. Occupational therapists, physiotherapists can assess a couple of the domains. Did I say speech therapists? Because that's another area as well. So it's a multidiscipline team, and the ideal world would be somebody goes to a FASD diagnostic clinic. However, it can be quite expensive and generally wait lists are very long. And therefore, if you have any concerns, my advice to you firstly would be to go to the NOFASD website to actually find out more about FASD, phone the helpline, because I can honestly say, as somebody, you heard Jessica say around 4 years it took for her diagnosis, and I know her mum really quite well, and I know how many years she was compiling a huge amount of evidence. For myself, again, because there were no red flags, we didn't have a history of sort of mental health issues or trauma or alcohol dependency, and we were able to curtail a lot of my son's behaviour, just as Jessica has described in our family unit. There wasn't trauma, so we had that sort of lesser impact there as well. But it took me several attempts to actually get a referral, even though I was coming from my position at NOFASD Australia and had become really quite FASD informed. So really arming yourself with information, there's checklists on the website. And then the service directory on the FASD Hub also provides a list of people that can be contacted for diagnostic services, and that's also available through the helpline for NOFASD as well. That's probably the short answer at this point. Yeah, but there's a lot more that I could say on that.
Okay, we've got a specific question from a midwife, and then we're going to wade into the social policy side of things. So as a midwife, we often speak to women about their alcohol consumption in pregnancy as part of the booking in process. So great, that's terrific, those conversations being had. But this person is saying that you often have women who say they've given up, but they're very anxious about having drunk in those early weeks before they found out or confirmed their pregnancy. What's the best thing to say to women in that instance?
Look, we know that cortisol, so the stress hormone, often is a teratogen. We know that it's not helpful for the developing fetus. So I would really encourage somebody to lessen someone's concern. So reassure them that, you know, there's never too late to give up alcohol during pregnancy, and to reassure them during those early stages that, you know, to worry about it, that you can't change what's already happened. Support them, encourage them to continue to sort of drink and eat healthily throughout their pregnancy, and having something recorded on someone's record is crucial, because at those later stages, for them to know that during those first few years or months, if they start to see issues that are occurring, then go to seek more advice. But really, I would say during the pregnancy is not to worry, which is easier to be said than done, but it's really important if possible.
I think it would be helpful as well if midwives and knew maybe or could share what some of those early signs may be. I don't know. I mean, again, not wanting to scare new parents, but you know, some women don't know what the signs may be, like poor sucking reflex, or disturbed sleep, or if the child is, you know, a bit you know, oversensitized, you know, sorry, I'm thinking of the shock reflex, you know, if they get easily shocked.
Reflex.
Yeah, thank you. That there are early, and of course I'm not a clinician, I'm not a health professional, just a person with lived it. These are just things that I've learned, yeah. Talking to professionals and clinicians and things like that, but that a lot of new mothers wouldn't know that those are things that you can kind of look for.
Now we're nearly out of time, but I do want to just quickly address this question that's come through about those executive function issues that can be caused and the way that these can affect people's abilities to do all those things that Jessica was talking about, you know, the decision making, the focus, the impulse control. We do know that those can lead people down some really negative paths. And that's why in your presentation, Sophie, in the Banksia Hill Detention Centre, we found the prevalence was over 1/3 of young folk in that centre had FASD symptoms. So I think probably given the time, I'm going to direct people to the seminar that you did yesterday, because you will have talked more about some of the social policy aspects of this. But some of the things that you and I have talked about, Sophie, that are really, really quick wins would be screening in places like youth detention and for kids in out-of-home care. Is there anything you'd add to that in the last few minutes?
Exactly what you've just said there, Diana. All recommendations from the Senate inquiry into FASD, the early screening, the midwife that, you know, has mentioned as well, having that recorded on someone's records so that it is there. If only somebody had asked me when my son was 2 or 3 years old, could it be that you drank alcohol during your pregnancy, which I revealed to my GP when I went there in those first few weeks, then I believe that would make a massive difference.
Jessica, are there any last messages that you'd like to leave people with?
I think just have the conversation, you know. I think it's important that we speak about the consequences of alcohol in pregnancy, but we do it in a safe space for women, where they can speak about the issues and feel protected and feel like they're going to be empowered with the information, and they're not going to be shamed or blamed, because we can't actually address the issues and we can't address the consequences unless people feel that they can speak about it. And at the moment, you know, we're doing the work to try and change that, but you know, the stigma is very strong. And so I really encourage health professionals, clinicians and individuals, you know, and the like, to speak about it and know and share what they learn.
And that's a specific question someone's got here about the best way to start that conversation. So maybe lead with some of those statistics that you guys have told us about today. Half of pregnancies are unplanned, you know, damage can happen before you even know.
And understanding that low levels of exposure are also causing damage, and that there is no safe level at any stage during the pregnancy. Your baby, our brains are still developing up until I think it is 23 years old or something, 22. Our brains are still developing. So from the point of conception till well into our adulthoods, our brains are needing protection, and it's, yeah, we need to share that information.
Thank you both so much. That's been informative and helpful. Everybody, I would strongly encourage you to get on your social media on Friday, share the information about International FASD Awareness Day, get that message out there, and do go to the NOFASD website and check out some of those resources. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you to everyone for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.